The new Netflix four-part drama series, Adolescence, has received rave reviews. Here at CPYU, we've watched it. We applaud the way it raises so many of the issues and problems facing teenagers and their families today. If you've already watched Adolescence, we encourage you to keep listening. And if you haven't, we recommend taking the time to watch before listening to this episode of our podcast. If you care about kids, the Adolescence miniseries is one we highly recommend. That's what we're talking about on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Youth Culture Matters. I'm Walt Mueller here at CPYU, and I'm pretty excited about the conversation we're going to have today. We call it Youth Culture Matters because we want to look at things that matter. We want to talk about things that matter. We want to process them through a biblical world and life view, and certainly the brand new Netflix four-part series, Adolescence, which dropped in March just a few weeks ago, is something that matters in the culture. Those of us who have watched it, and I've watched it twice now, and you find things that you didn't see the first time around. But those of us who have watched it, especially those of us who work with kids and certainly parents and youth workers, we have a lot to learn from this, and there are a lot of takeaways. It's very, very good, as you'll hear. We're going to have a roundtable discussion here with three of our CPYU research fellows, and then along with Chris Wagner, who's here in the studio with me. But I want to give a spoiler alert. I'm going to read what the definition of a spoiler alert is in case you don't know. I'm sure everybody knows. But it's a warning that important details or plot twists about a movie, TV show, book, or other media are about to be revealed. And that is going to happen here today. So if you haven't watched Adolescence, that four-part series on Netflix, and you don't want it spoiled, you're going to want to shut us down right now and come back to us after you watch, which we recommend that you do. At least I assume we're all going to recommend that you do. I would recommend it. But this is a show that's pretty amazing. So I've invited in three of our research fellows here at CPYU. Katie Schneider's here, Mike Terry, Josiah Rios. They can tell you more about themselves. I think you're familiar with them all. You can go on our website and learn more about them. They are all boots-on-the-ground youth workers. They're culture watchers as well, and so we were excited to hear a little bit about what their takeaways are from the Netflix series Adolescence. So we're going to have a conversation about that. Before we get started, I'm just going to say this, that I said to Lisa after I watched this that this is in my top three most impactful initial views of some sort of media all time. And she was trying to guess what the other ones were. She guessed one of them. But let me tell you what they are. So in 1978, I watched the film Midnight Express, based on Billy Hughes, who was a student who smuggled hashish into Turkey. He was arrested, and it was about his experience in a Turkish prison. That just wrecked me, watching that. Insight into human depravity and just the brokenness that's in the world. And that was a long time ago that I watched that, and it's still, when I think about it, it's a tough one. The next one was in 1999. Some of you are familiar with this, the film Fight Club. It starred Brad Pitt and Ed Norton, Chuck Palahniuk. It was based on his book Fight Club. I watched that with one of our guys, Tom Petrosky, who was working here with us at the time. We were at the National Youth Workers Convention and skipped out of a general session to run over to the mall and watch this. And when it was over, we just sat there in our seats, silent, unable to say anything. It was pretty powerful. And now this, Adolescence. So I think this is a film or a series that's really about, Chris and I were talking about this morning, what I would call an unseen, virtually unknown adolescent underworld that there's always been that. It's always existed, but, man, the way it is now is pretty unbelievable, and we've got to wake up to it. So, Katie, Josiah, and Mike, welcome. Let me start with this question, and Chris, the same to you, so feel free to jump in whenever you want. But first impressions. You watched it, and I would say first impression might be best summarized in what you would say to someone if they said, "Well, what was that like?" First impressions. Let me start with Katie.
First impression for me would probably be the word that just keeps coming back to me is intense. Um, yeah, it's very eye-opening, but very intense.
Hmm.
Not something that I could sit and watch like all in one sitting, because I needed time to like process through after each one.
Yeah. So the question, what was viewing this like for you? You had to take a break, huh?
Yes. Yeah, there's no way I could have like just powered through all four. There was just so much that was happening in each one that I felt like I needed I needed to step away for a minute in between each.
Yeah. Hey, Katie, let me ask you this, and this is a question for everybody, but I came away from this, and to me, people who haven't watched, they might say, well, okay, it was riveting. Was it gratuitous in nature? My answer to that question would be absolutely not. Did you feel that way at all, that it was gratuitous in terms of trying to put things out there in front of us to shock viewers, like gratuitous sexuality or violence would be in a film?
No.
Yeah.
No. I didn't feel that way.
Yeah. Well, that's good. We can stop right there. You agree with me. I won't go to these other guys because they like to chip away at me a little bit. Let me go. Hey, Josiah, how about you? And you're working with middle school students, so yeah. This thing is for those who have watched it. Just remind you, it's about a 13-year-old boy who commits a murder, and he's from a family that seems to be loving. They have no idea that he's capable of this. They are shocked when they discover this. They believe him when he says initially he did not do this, and it is, certainly hard to watch. But this is one of your kids, so to speak, as you work with middle schoolers.
Yeah, and that's where my own children in my own household aren't quite this age. So I wonder, watching it with my own kids in that way, if that would be different. Because I feel like this seems to be kind of more of a perspective, a show on the stage of parenting almost than on the stage of adolescence. And we can unpack that a little bit more. But like it starts with the dad and ends with the other dad, and you can see both of their stories and how they interact with the dads or how they interact with their kids throughout, which is just fascinating in and of itself. But every parent's going to feel that tug, no matter the stage that you're at and with your kids. And they did a great job capturing that. The whole one shot strategy. Oh, I kind of hated that because I felt the anxiousness with it. You could just feel how you just felt on edge, and it just went from thing to thing. You could feel the helplessness of even some of the characters and the situations they were in, but then even just the chaos. It just really helped all build it together. So they really did a great job helping you feel kind of this stage and this extreme example of kind of what sometimes that adolescence phase can feel like.
Yeah, Chris and I were watching it pretty much at the same time, and we were each watching it alone in our homes. I don't know if your wife's watched it yet. My wife has not. Chris says no. So, but we would come in and talk a little bit, and it was interesting. With the first episode, about 10 minutes in, I'm thinking to myself, all of a sudden it dawned on me, they're doing this in one take. It's a one camera, one take. There was no cuts, or were no cuts. There were no splices. We even went and searched this. Nothing computer generated. Pretty amazing that they, cinematically that they pulled this off. But the actors and the acting is absolutely superb. And the 13-year-old actor Owen Cooper, who plays Jamie Miller in this is his first acting job. And it's quite amazing when you read a bit about how he took this on, and then you watch it and you're going, wow, that kid's amazing. Yeah. Chris, what about you? And then we'll go to Mike.
Yeah, it was gripping. It was. I ended up watching it in two takes, the first two episodes and then the final two episodes. But I get what Katie's saying about like needing to stop and take a break. But I kind of had to force myself after episode 2 to like stop and go to bed because it was so gripping that I just wanted to get through the whole thing. But I forced myself and, went back the next day and watched last two. But it was just super powerful in that way. The storytelling and the acting, it kind of punches you in the gut at times. And, brings out lots of emotions and thoughts. But
yeah, we've talked internally here about shows we've watched together, over the years, whether it was The Office or 24, catching up. Of course, you weren't part of those conversations. No. You didn't want to watch 24. But what's interesting about this one is that there's really no resolution. There's so many, right. When it's at the end of each episode, there are a lot of questions where you're left hanging, which is pretty typical. But when you get to the last episode, you're wondering what happened to her, what happened to him.
Yeah, I think after we had both watched we just both randomly watched the first two episodes the same night without each other knowing that we were doing so. And I think the next day I said to you, we were referring to a certain character, and I said, yeah, I have a feeling his story's not over. And then that character basically never, we didn't get any resolution. That character never appeared again or was mentioned again. So, And it's not. I don't say that to say like, oh, they messed up. They didn't. It's just, you kind of didn't know what to expect from episode to episode.
Yeah, Mike, what about you? We were joking beforehand, and if you've ever heard us banter with Mike, Mike's a guy who we tease him. He's a little bit. We tease him for being backwards with social media and technology and things. He's actually living well. And, so he knows we're messing with him. But I thought and we'll talk a little bit about some of the storylines here and the things that play into this. Josiah mentioned the parenting aspect, which, oh, man, that was powerful. As a dad, as a grandparent, I was hit in the gut so many times. But, Mike, I was thinking about you with, some of the conversations we've had about technology and social media, some of the good cautiousness that you exercise. And so this is right up your alley as well. But what was viewing this like for you?
Yeah, just on a sort of emotional level, I watched it with my wife, which was actually really helpful. She really drew out some of the main insights that I'll probably be sharing a little bit later. But similar, echoing all of you, impressed by the quality of the show, which I think really makes a big difference in terms of the technique that they use with the one shot, the acting, and also the lack of resolution. It just felt like you were there and living into this tension with them, which I think is what they wanted to accomplish. I would also say it was very subtle. Like the show wasn't heavy-handed. You had to kind of make your decisions and make your judgments about what was going on in the world, in their world, and in our world, right? In a very sort of nuanced way. And so I just appreciated that it wasn't like, here's clearly the villain here, or here's clearly how you should see it. It's like, no, there's a lot of threads that you need to pull out of this to make sense of it. And so, but yeah, echoing, Chris said gripping, it was heavy. It was engaging, but also it was important. I think there's a lot of people, obviously it's very popular right now. It's one of the most watched shows. It had broke some records. So I think it's obviously resonating. And I think that's good and healthy that there's sort of this awareness. And I think, thinking about some of the really popular things that have come out recently, like The Anxious Generation with Jonathan Haidt, and some of these people becoming more aware to some of these tensions and dangers in the lives of young people and in the lives of parents today. I think that's an encouraging sign, and these conversations are pretty healthy and good to be having right now.
Yeah, that's good. Now, for those who don't know, and I like how you said, not heavy-handed, and yeah, I mean, you're just thinking from start to finish, you're identifying. There was a reason behind this. Now, Stephen Graham, who actually plays Eddie Miller, Jamie's father, is he is actually one of the co-writers and one of the creators of this. It's interesting that he stars in it as well. And what really drove them was to raise the awareness of and to help parents understand, to help adults and others who work with kids understand what's happening in the lives of kids, specifically with some of the the growing amount of knife violence among young people in the UK. It takes place in the UK, if you haven't watched it yet. And so they wanted to give some background on that and look at some of the causes of that. So, yeah, it's man, I can't stop raving about it just because it is so powerful like that. But let me ask you this: you all are working with students. You know, sometimes we watch things and we go, all right, that's sort of like what's going on with kids, or that's way off. Is this, in your estimation, an accurate portrayal of life for kids today? Anybody?
Definitely think it's an extreme example that we may not all get to kind of cross shoulders with or rub shoulders with and necessary experience. But I think they did a great job of hitting a lot of these different aspects of this adolescence phase, and they did a great job helping us feel that. I mean, I appreciated the interaction of the detective with his son in the school, and he's like, "Dad, you got it all wrong." Like, and it's embarrassing to see you blunder about. It's like, wait, the detective dad is missing like the cues and what these things mean. So I think like as parents, it's so easy to, yeah, there's all this slang and terminology and stuff that happens in these young kids' lives that it's easy to feel clueless and not sure what's going on. And that's definitely the case with how quickly things can move in the youth culture and what they're going through and the slang they're using, what emojis mean and what they're trying to communicate there. Like that cluelessness, I feel like was relatable and definitely happens. And it's like, wait, if the detective dad, who's his job to understand things and look at clues and try and figure things out, like if he's not getting it, it's like, okay, well, maybe as a dad too, maybe it's understandable that I'm confused too.
Yeah.
Yeah, very relatable to that scene.
And I thought that was pretty accurate as well. You know, I came away from watching that scene and going, all right, I got to catch up on a lot of this stuff that's going on. Like you mentioned, Josiah, the slang, the emojis, that sort of thing, and how that figures into bullying and the way kids are communicating, which, again, he's a detective, but this is this unknown, unseen adolescent underworld that exists that, because of the digital divide, we're just not, as older folks, aware of. So, yeah, I thought too, you know, you mentioned that with a detective. I was thinking about the second detective, the gal who was the detective there. I think, what was her last name? Marsh, D.I. Marsh. Or anyway, it was interesting in that second episode when they were in the school. She just looked so uncomfortable the entire time, and you know, sort of with an eye rolling type thing. Because and she was, you realize this a little bit later. She was reliving, as she was in the school, some of the brokenness of her own adolescent years, but seeing the utter disrespect of the students towards those in authority, which is, I think, quite common. What about the rest of you? I mean, do you think it's accurate, certain aspects, or what was accurate, what was not?
One thing, you know, I was thinking a little bit about, I just mentioned it, but Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, and how his whole thing of like, we overprotect in the real world, we underprotect online. And I did think it was interesting that clearly the underprotecting online was part of it. You know, I remember, I think it was in the first episode, maybe the second. I think it was the first though, when they meet with Jamie, the detectives meet with Jamie in the prison or in the police station, and they're showing him his things he shared on Instagram, sort of nude or almost nude photos of women as a 13-year-old boy. He's posting those publicly, just models he likes. I just remember thinking like the dad wasn't surprised by that or didn't seem upset by the fact that his son was sharing semi-pornographic material online to his friends. It was like the normalizing of pornography, like this is what kids just are doing. And so the underprotecting online was clearly evident, but these kids were also roaming the streets, right? And so I don't know if that's just like obviously every parent is different. There's also going to be enclaves of that, but I did see that was a little bit of a tension and like a disconnect with Haidt's theory that like parents are like worry warts about where their kids are. It seemed like those kids were just kind of running around the city wielding knives with their friends as, late into the night as, middle schoolers. So I thought that was a little bit interesting to think about. And I do think like my context is so different. I'm in, suburban Midwest Ohio. And so an urban context that would look like it was a little bit below the poverty line or close to it, maybe lower middle class, people struggling in that area, blue collar town. I'm pretty disconnected from that socioeconomic world. And so a lot of the families I work with are pretty aware of some of the dynamics with social media. They kind of keep their kids in a healthy way protected. And so it's hard for me to see that, but knowing that it exists and knowing that these tensions are real in other places, I think is accurate. And I think playing those dynamics out isn't in an accurate way, because clearly it's based on what's going on in Britain and the UK right now too. So yeah, I thought mostly it felt like very real and accurate to me, but there was maybe some tensions in there that everybody's going to have to kind of nuance out based on their own context.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you said there, Mike, and in the last episode when Jamie's mom and dad, Eddie and Mandy, are sitting on the edge of the bed, and that's gut wrenching. That conversation is just unbelievable, and they're replaying, going back in time, his childhood, seeing him here, seeing him there, thinking about what they did, thinking about what they didn't do, questioning this, questioning that. Wondering how we made him and how we made his sister Lisa the same, who turned out entirely different. But one of the things, when I think about Height, it's interesting you mentioned Height's book. They felt he was safe because he was in his room. And, they got on the computer, they got on the chair, they got on the desk, they got on the headphones, they got on the gaming stuff, whatever it was he had in there. And they felt like he's right there. He's on the other side of the wall from us. And so there's that feeling of safety that we really can't embrace that. We don't, because you're exposed to the entire world, which is part of what was happening here. Yeah. Katie.
Just to jump in on that, I think for me, viscerally, like seeing his room and how normal it was, it just looked like any teenage boy's room that you'll see today, with a gaming system, big monitor, just soccer stuff on the wall, like just so normal. That juxtaposed with the situation he found himself in was pretty haunting to me. Like, this wasn't some extremist kid, that was, I mean, he kind of was in some sense, but he was also normal. Like, he was also doing some of the same things his peers were doing. And so I just think that they portrayed that in a subtle but powerful way.
Yeah, when I was thinking about this, I took like copious notes. I have all these pages of notes and quotes and things the second time through. And I caught it the second time when the police barge in that opening episode. And it's like they're going after a serial killer when they break into the house. It's not, and I'm not, again, it wasn't gratuitous, but it was an entry that was warranted by the crime that was committed and justified by the crime that was committed. But when they go up and they go into his room, his dad is yelling, "He's only a kid, mate. He's only a kid." And when he hops out of bed, when Jamie hops out from under the covers and he stands up, he's wet his pants like a kid. And this is one of the things that hit me. You've got this juxtaposition between seeing this kid at certain times and his countenance and the story like a little kid, like I'm seeing him like a fourth grade grandson, and then all of a sudden he looks like, an 18 or 19-year-old with his countenance because of what he's done. And I think that depicts a bit of childhood. Katie, what about you? Were you going to say something?
Yeah, as obviously I agree with everything everyone has said. One of the things that really stuck out to me that I think is definitely an accurate representation of youth culture is this search for identity. Not always seeking it in the right places, obviously, but even different of the students that we meet. There's Jamie, who on the outside looks like this very meek, mild 13-year-old kid, portraying himself very differently on Instagram. And I think part of that, he's trying to figure out who he is and where he belongs. When asked, I don't remember, I think it's in the third episode when he's having the conversation with the one um, psychiatrist or psychologist, and she asks him why he has an Instagram, and he says, I need one. Like, we have reached a point with our kids that they are so desperate for someone to tell them who they are, that they're seeking it in the wrong places. Um, but also there, we keep talking about this like juxtaposition or these tensions that exist, but there's also scenes where you see him, like a lot of our students, looking to their parents or looking to other adults for validation. Um, this one of the scenes, well, that same episode when he's talking to the psychiatrist, and he's blown up on her several times, um, and she says, "Okay, we're done." And he's like, "Wait, I need to ask you a question." And his question is, "Do you like me?"
Oh,
Like, they've just had this whole gut-wrenching, awful interaction. And his final question to her is, "Do you like me?" Earlier in the series when he has to pick they call it the appropriate adult, to like be in the room when he's being interrogated, he picks his dad. Like, he's looking for approval and validation and love from these adults in his life. And I don't know, like, if he wasn't feeling that at all. Obviously, we don't know the whole story, but there's this tension between he's still a child looking for the love of his parents and the other important adults in his life, but still seeking it in wrong places and getting himself into trouble. Um, this dependence on social media, a dependence on wanting your peers to like you. The other character that stuck out to me was Jade, the victim, Katie, her best friend. And there's a scene where there's a teacher sitting with Jade after she beats up another kid, and she basically says, I have nowhere else to go. Katie was my best friend. Like, she has nowhere else to turn, she has nowhere else to go, and she doesn't know what to do. Like, she's lost all sense of who she is because she has sought identity again in somebody else, in a different person, instead of, as we would hope to teach our children, to find their identity in Christ.
mm.
So, like, yeah, the whole identity sort of tension, whatever you want to call it, um, was really heart-wrenching to watch.
Yeah, good. And it's like everything you're talking about here. It's like these guys, when they wrote this and when they acted this, they pulled back the curtain on things we need to be aware of. And I thought they did that really well. Chris, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, one of the things that felt maybe a little bit too real, if that, in the sense, was episode 2 and what it said about the education of students, our educational system, what happens in the school, what happens to the student experience when that parents are absolutely clueless to. It felt all too real, and I think the detective kind of towards the end of the episode asked a question, something along the lines of, "Does it look like there's any learning taking place here?" I'm probably paraphrasing, but and because what he just witnessed, the reality is no. Between the bullying taking place, the lack of respect for authority, kids on their cell phones, distractions, physical violence, bullying taking place both physically and through social media, teachers not giving a crap, all of the things kind of put together. Like, the reality is, like, you could see a school day go by with no education taking place. And to be honest, I've kind of walked out of my own local school sometimes from different experiences, wondering those same questions, like maybe not quite to the extreme that was portrayed in that episode, but I've walked out of my, our local school going, is any education actually taking place? Is there anything, are our kids learning anything while in school? Or is it just literally kids going in there and holding on for dear life? And waiting, just can't wait for the the bell to ring at the end of the day, and I think there's just a lot of heartache when you think about what teens have to endure going through the school day.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that, Chris, because I talk to teachers, and what I hear from teachers, especially those who have been teaching for quite some time, they would talk about the decline in respect, the decline in responsibility, the decline in, having any sort of authority at all. And I was thinking, as you were talking about this, there's this, the first time in the second episode when the detectives go into the school, and they're going to go from classroom to classroom because they're trying to get more information. They're trying to find the murder weapon, which is a knife. And the first classroom that they go into, Detective Bascom says, he says, we're here to talk about this. And immediately the teacher yells, put your phones away. Put your phones away. And we heard that several times through the whole thing, that the phones were a distraction, which goes back, Mike, to Jonathan Haidt's recommendation, no phones in schools. But what was crazy then is when Bascom, the detective, starts to ask the questions, one of the kids in the front row very flippantly, this is a middle school kid, all right? I'm imagining myself in middle school when one of my classmates is murdered and one of my classmates is implicated. I would have been in shock. And this kid starts joking about it and says, did you get a video? Did you get a video of it? As if we want to see that. I mean, kids, and everybody laughs, and kids are so desensitized to these things, Yeah, it's, one other thing I wanted to say when one of you was talking about the dad and him being a kid, when he gets put in the police van after they take him out of his house, this is Jamie, you see him sort of reaching against the glass as his dad's standing on the other side of the glass being told, you got to follow us, you can't ride with us. And he's reaching and just weeping. Jamie is just, I want Dad here. And then in the final scene of that opening episode, as they're sitting there alone, father and son, and father's just seen the video evidence, and he knows that his son perpetrated this. Jamie reaches out to him. The dad has his face in his hands, and Jamie's, Dad, and Dad turns away from him, which I could understand, but eventually he turns back and embraces him, asking him, what have you done, why, and then he hugs him, but just, gut-wrenching. Well, we need to take a break here. We're going to come back. I want to work through some other things in some of the other episodes. We're going to end, obviously, with some applications, because there are some great bits of application here as we're made aware of what's going on in the lives of our kids, both for parents and for youth workers as well, things that can really guide us in how we parent and how we do youth ministry. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you enjoy listening to Youth Culture Matters and would like to support the ongoing efforts of this ministry, you can do so by visiting cpyu.org/giving to make a donation. Your prayers and financial support make this podcast possible.
Well, we're back and continuing our conversation with my friends here, our CPYU research fellows, Katie, Josiah, Mike, and then Chris here in the studio with me, Chris Wagner, about the Netflix series Adolescence. And we've covered a lot already. I thought during this segment it might be helpful to give people some perspective and talk about some of the most poignant moments. I wish everybody who's listening, who's watched, had a chance to weigh in. We'll list some of ours, but I want to go through the 4 episodes. And let's remember that each of these episodes was shot in a single take, which meant it was real time. So you're seeing an hour, basically, 4 different times, 4 different hours. The first episode is day 1, and it runs from the time that Jamie is arrested till he's, at least initially interrogated, the interactions with the attorney, the police, the detectives, the nurse, which, boy, that was something else. And then, and by the way, let me just say this. Well, let's pause on episode 1 there, and I'll go to episode 2 in a minute. Anything that really struck you in episode 1, and I'll throw one thing out there. We hear a lot about police brutality, the insensitivity of police and that sort of thing. I thought from start to finish, after they burst into the house, he was treated with care and respect. I felt that the booking officer, the nurse, the attorney, everybody, even the detectives, even when he was riding in the car, Detective Bascom working to calm him down, and I that was refreshing to me, to see that there was care, because this is a kid. What else? What else did you guys see that was worth looking at?
I think one of the big things that, and you see it at several points during the episode, but um, just the fear in Jamie. I think oftentimes our kids don't think about the long-term consequences of the choices that they make. So I don't know if part of what we're seeing is just the shock of what's taking place, or it's Jamie coming to realize like, oh, I'm being caught, and this is going to have some very serious implications for my future. But just his body language, obviously the look on his face, the tears, all of that, but even just watching his posture, like he is physically shaking, visibly shaking. There it is. Um, he's oftentimes like fidgeting, biting his nails, playing with his clothes. Like he is so afraid, um, so in fear of what is taking place. And obviously, you can't blame the kid, for having those fears. But again, I don't know if it's he's now realizing that he's gotten caught, um, or what it is. But yeah, just the visible fear, to me was really striking.
I
Okay,
oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
I was gonna just hop in on that just same comment of the fear, parallel to Jamie, and obviously the experience he's going through with the fear and anxiety is Adam, um, Detective Bascom's son. So his name is Adam, I believe.
Yep.
He's not going to school because he keeps saying he has like a stomach problem and he's avoiding school and all of this stuff. And you find out, right, in the later episodes, that he's being bullied. And so his fear and anxiety are also paralleled in another father-son relationship. And I think so you have this very subtle way of like, this is the world that they're living in to some degree. Like this is a world full of not of trust and flourishing with adults or with others. It is a world of fear and anxiety of trying to make your way. And so I don't know that it was at a poignant moment so much as it was they're creating an atmosphere in a world for you to understand how kids, rightfully or wrongfully, are experiencing their world. And I think that became pretty clear even in episode 1.
That's a good catch.
Only thing I'd add to that was just to see the pattern of him, for better or worse, I guess, still leaning back into his dad and relying upon his dad as he's getting arrested, as he's getting processed. He's like looking to his dad for some answers, just not sure what's going on, which in some sense, I guess, is a good thing, as you want him to lean into that. But I think, kind of as Katie and Mike were saying, it's this fear response of not knowing what to do, because in some sense he still responds and looks to his dad. But if that relationship bridge hasn't been built in situations beyond just fearful moments, how's the communication going to look? How's the trust actually going to be there? And you can kind of see that by the end of episode 1, when the dad like doesn't turn towards him, which we found out he does at other times during his sports and things like that. You could see there was shame, and that ends up being a key part of Jamie's story too.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about, just as Jamie's reaction in episode 1. When you get to episode 3, I don't know if he had taken so much time, 7 months, I guess it was, had passed when he's being interviewed by the psychologist. But does he disassociate from the reality? I mean, he really does not think he's claiming he did not do it. And he sees evidence of it, but he still claims he did not do it. Is that a flat-out lie, or does he truly believe that he did not do that? Is he living in this alternative reality where he's convinced himself? And I haven't studied criminology enough, but I've heard stories of this where people, convince themselves that they actually didn't perpetrate the very things that they, in fact perpetrated. So, yeah. I'm just looking over my notes from that first episode. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add, but I just keep thinking about, man, this is not the way it's supposed to be. How have we gotten to this point where these things are happening? And it really is gut-wrenching. And I think about a child committing an adult crime. And, I was talking to Lisa about this when we first moved to Lancaster County 33 years ago. Within that first year, I was called in for jury duty. And I was put in a jury pool where they were, choosing the jurors, and they would bring us. I was there for a couple of days, and they would bring us in. It was actually a murder trial, and it was a murder trial where they were trying a 13-year-old as an adult. And so I had killed an older teenager on a playground, a girl. So this young boy, 13. Now, he looked a lot older than 13. He looked like he was 18 because I sat there in the courtroom across from him. But I remember being stunned by that. I was not chosen for the jury because they asked me what I did, and when I told them what I did, I was excused. But, I thought back to that. This is a kid who looks like a kid. And, yeah, so that. Well, let me get episode 2 is day 2, so it's the day after all this goes down, and he's arrested. And so it's the visit, as we've said earlier, to the school. Anything that jumped out at you there? Any interactions besides what we've mentioned already? Any overarching impressions of what's happening with kids? Any lines that people spoke? If you had a chance to record any of those that were eye-opening, I'll throw one out just to, kind of prime the pump here with the rest of you. But Bascombe is thinking back to when Detective Bascombe is thinking back to when he was a kid. And he makes this statement. He says, it's crazy what your brain tells you to do when you're a kid. It's crazy what your brain tells you to do when you're a kid. Now, that's not an excuse. It doesn't excuse sinful behavior, but it explains a lot of it. And I've been reading books on, the adolescent brain. I've been doing that for a while, but I just finished one last night by Lisa D'Amour about adolescence and their emotional selves. And she talks a lot about that, about adolescent brain development, where kids are at. Anything you guys came up with from that episode?
Yeah, when the other detective, Marsh, what was her name?
Marsh, I think. Detective Marsh. Yeah.
I think she had a line when they were kind of processing and trying to figure out, like, okay, what's going on, and also talking about this school life on the campus. And she said the line, I think it was her, where she said, all kids need is one thing that makes them feel good about themselves, which I feel like was simple, but also like actually revealing what Jamie's issue may actually be, the thing he feels finally good about, or things he's strong. It's like why this was so challenging for him is targeting on the one thing that he had, whether it was his identity piece or what thing he was struggling with. But I think also reveals the true reality that, there's a lot of identity searching happening for these kids, and sometimes it ends up in the one thing or a wrong thing. And I think related to that, the other detective said, we're here to know why. And she was like, you can't know why. Like, we're never going to actually figure out why. And I think we have some hope in the fact that as Christians, and as we look at God's word, like ultimately the why of evil is sin, and right in the brokenness of the world that we're in. And if you take that out of your worldview, you can't find out why. You're like, well, what caused this person? Is it nature? Is it nurture? All these different things. But there's this almost a comforting fact. We do have an answer when we allow sin to say, actually, it's because there's brokenness and there's world is broken. That doesn't mean people are excused and whatnot, but we have more of a why with our worldview of Christianity and what God's word says. Yeah,
we're born with a sin nature, and in so many ways, the nurture that we experience can either make us aware of that and lead us towards the pursuit of God, pursuit of holiness when we're in Christ, or the nurture can lead us away from that. And so much of what our kids experience, through the phones does that. There was one spot in that second episode, I don't know if any of you caught this, but Tommy is implicated in this. Jamie's friend Tommy is implicated, and he's chased out of the class, and Bascombe finally catches him, and Tommy eventually admits the knife was his, and Tommy is arrested. Before that happens, though, Bascombe and his partner are sitting in a room interviewing Tommy. And Tommy is, Bascom tells him he's going to have a black eye because Jade hit him. And Bascom reveals that, he wanted a black eye when he was a kid because it make him look tough or whatever. And he ran into, he put himself into a phone booth or something. He ran into something, tried to give him one. Tommy asked him, did that work for you? No. I knocked out a tooth. And then Tommy wanted to see, his teeth because he thought this guy's teeth were good. Well, what was interesting about this, here this kid, his friend has been implicated in a murder. His classmates has been murdered. And, you're talking about identity. You brought that up. He is concerned about appearance so much so that he asks to look at the teeth, and he explains to Bascom, after he looks at Bascom's teeth, that he brushes his teeth like crazy. And why does he do that? Because people care. He has to, I don't know if you caught what he was saying, but the implication that he was making was, I've got to look good for everybody. And this appearance culture that's out there, especially as it's fueled by social media.
I think he even said he didn't understand why teeth mattered, but they knew that they did, that other people cared.
Oh,
that it mattered to other people, so therefore he was going to make sure he took care of his.
Yeah. So episode 3, this is 7 months later.
Can I say something real quick, too?
Ahead,
just to tie onto the conversation that Josiah mentioned about, the teens just need one thing. And because I was pretty harsh on the whole school education system, right, in the earlier segment. But the one thing that made a difference for that other detective, she said, was a teacher. She had one teacher that sort of kept her, changed things around for her. And so that speaks a powerful word, that because obviously I want to acknowledge that there are great educators out there. There are great teachers there. And so whether you're a youth worker or an educator, whoever, if you're involved in the life of a teen, you can make a difference.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just takes that one person, that one good teacher to really keep somebody from going down the wrong path. So
yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Chris. Go ahead, Mike.
Say too, I think the contrast of that episode, of the chaos, of the distance between all these educators and administrators and the students. There's that scene where I think Adam's getting bullied in the cafeteria, and this sort of teacher walks by, and he basically just yells at the kid, but he doesn't go up to Adam, and he doesn't really actually address it. He just sort of is trying to be serve a role of an authoritarian figure, but doesn't actually try to get to know the kids in any way. But the one bright spot is the language arts professor or teacher who sits with Jade alone in the classroom and wants to sit down with her and now Jade is angry and she storms out, but she was literally the only contrast that I noticed in that whole episode, maybe even the whole show to some degree, that was an adult figure seeking to enter the life of a kid, to understand them. And I think she was, even little things, the whole school, everybody was wearing drab kind of colors. It was a very drab day. She was wearing a bright red dress. I just think that there was a liveliness about her character that she was being intentional in the life of a kid. And I think that goes on what Chris is saying is it really doesn't take that much, just that intentionality to enter into a life of a kid. So
yeah, one of the things we say here all the time is, look, we've been made for relationships. Our kids have been made for relationships. And sin has broken those relationships. We would say even in a marriage, you're two broken people living together. We're all married here. We know what that's like. Our spouses know what that's like with us, and certainly our families. When we have kids, we're all broken people. So sin breaks our relationships. But we also say that when we pursue relationship as God designed it, that's God's shalom, that's God's intent. Good things can happen. And so I love that you're pointing out the power of relationships, which really, as we say, can eclipse everything else that's going on in the culture. And so to watch a model like that is a good thing. Well, let's go to the third episode, 7 months later. This is the visit of Bryony, I think her name is. She's the psychologist who comes in. This is her 5th visit. She's had 4 prior visits with him. This is going to be the last visit. And she is doing this because his team has 2 psychologists, one of them is her, who are trying to get inside his head to understand what motivated him, what drives him, where's he at. She does not want to know. what the other psychologist says. She's clear about that. She's trying to form her own opinions here to pass on to the team that maybe would be helpful for the judge when it comes to the case itself. And we need to understand at this point, Adam is still going to plead, Jamie's still going to plead innocent. And so she starts to drive at masculinity. What does being a man feel like to you? A lot of this is because she realized he's been radicalized by his time online, especially along with some of his male friends, by misogynist-type material. Andrew Tate, the incel culture, involuntary celibates. These are men who are angry because they feel that women won't give them the time of day. It's that whole 80-20 thing where, 80% of the women are only attracted to 20% of the men. And certainly Adam fleshes that out. I'll let you guys talk to that if you want to. But what in this dialogue really struck you from start to finish? We've mentioned a couple things already, but this was powerful.
I think one of the things, and it goes back to what we were just talking about, when the psychologist first goes into the room, she is doing her best to make Jamie comfortable. Brings him the hot chocolate, has the little container of marshmallows because she knows he likes it like that, offers him a sandwich, is doing her best to have a relationship with Jamie. And I think there are certain times where like Jamie doesn't even know how to respond to that. Because you see this sort of back and forth, like they're having a very, I don't know if cordial is the right word, but they're having a good dialogue, and then like a switch flips and Jamie just goes off and is flipping chairs and obscenities all over the place. So even as the psychologist is trying to, she says over and over here, I just want to understand. I just want to understand. So here's an adult trying to enter this kid's world and make sense of what he's feeling. And he doesn't even know how to process that, which I thought was really interesting. Walt, you had mentioned earlier, maybe he almost like is dissociating at certain points, because he goes back and forth almost between these two personalities of, answering her questions and engaging, but then like getting super defensive and lying and like almost he has this pent up anger that just like comes out. But also has these moments of like low self-esteem, talking about how he's ugly and that's why girls don't like him because he's the ugliest. And yeah, I was just really struck by like it was almost like a view inside the mind of a teenager. Like they don't even know which way is up.
Yeah.
And so they are just like grasping at straws to trying to make sense. And sometimes even as parents and as youth workers, we try to enter their world and understand. They're not always going to be receptive to that, at least initially. So, that wasn't necessarily a specific moment in that episode, but just kind of the way the whole scene unfolded was just sort of fascinating to me.
Yeah, I like that, Katie. What you bring up there, I'll go back to that book I just finished reading last night, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers by Lisa D'Amour. And she talks about how, early on in the teenage years, kids are able to think abstractly, but the frontal lobe is not fully formed until later. So, decision-making, impulse control, things like that. That period of life, 13, 14, 15, is really, really tough in terms of the brain and sort of the crazy back and forth. And I would say I would list myself as Exhibit A, as I can think back and remember what I can remember from that time in my own life in terms of the way that I thought, and didn't understand what I was thinking necessarily. But in hindsight, looking back going, like, what were you thinking? I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know that I even was thinking clearly, but yeah, so that's good. Any of the rest of you, that episode 3. Yeah, Josiah.
Yeah, as I kind of watch through stuff like this, it's always helpful for me to kind of think through, okay, like this is an extreme example, but where do I see some of the thoughts of either my own kids in my own home or my own students that we see at the church? And the line that he said, which I think is super relatable and kind of reveals the slippery slope that maybe this two-face acting stuff can get into, as the line where he says, most boys would have touched her, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
makes me better.
Yeah.
This idea that he's blinded to the wrong that he did because of this comparison and thinking, well, I'm actually better than that. I didn't do that. Even though he leads up to one of the worst things to do to other humans, and that's murder someone.
Yeah.
And so slippery slope, but I think that's something super relatable that we can try to view in our own kids' lives to see, okay, where are they trying to push down and diminish what they did, comparing to others and saying, well, it's not as bad as that, but that gets us to blind to ourselves. And instead of actually pulling out, no, wait, what am I doing that is wrong? Why is this wrong? Because that's uncomfortable to sit in. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
That's why our kids do it. But it was a very, I think, helpful line to see that thought process slowly going down the hill. Oh, well, at that point, I feel like he was already all the way down the hill. But yeah, it's a good part of the scene.
Yeah. So just a couple things, and we'll move on to the fourth episode. Oh, Mike, you got something. I'm sorry, I missed you there.
I was just going to say, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit, but clearly one of the, at least in terms of the ideology that is surrounding this underground online teenage world, especially for the boys, is this kind of the toxic masculinity stuff, but also like the body dysmorphia stuff that's happening a lot with guys now, with like online workout culture and bodybuilding. And we kind of mentioned it with his friend Ryan, or is it Tom, whatever his friend was that got caught earlier. But there was this whole scene between him and the social worker and the psychologist, where they talked about he thought he was ugly. And that was being affirmed online, right, by Katie and her kind of bullying to him. And so this like intensity, and I remember feeling this as a kid too, like guys care about their appearance. Like guys want girls to think that they look, attractive and handsome and good and cute and whatever. And I think as a 13-year-old kid in middle school, that being amplified to the degree, and with some of the sort of other ideological sort of facets that are now accelerated in what they kept calling the manosphere online, all of those things, like you said, Walt, a kid cannot, in its executive functions in his brain, regulate those pressures in a way that in any sense of reality. And so it pushes him to these extremes of like, I have no identity, I have no hope or options because of this intense lack of attraction that I feel about myself or other people feel about me. So it's like this toxic masculinity piece that's feeding into it, but it's also like these kids just, are dealing with normal things that are just exacerbated by all of these influences online that parents aren't super aware of.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, it comes out in that discussion. He said, I'm ugly, I'm bad at sports, and he tells this riveting story that he remembers of, and later on in the fourth episode, his dad talks about trying to toughen him up, putting him in soccer, footy, football. And from his perspective, Jamie's perspective, he was horrible, and his dad wouldn't even look at him. He would look away. He interpreted that my dad's ashamed of me. And when we finally hear his dad talk about that, he says, I didn't know what to do. Everybody else was making fun of him. Everyone was, all the other parents were, kind of mocking him because he was so bad. So the kid's got that. He's lonely. He wants to be affirmed. He wants to be valued. He thinks he's ugly. Girls are not attracted to him. And when he talked about his idea of a date, he actually, as that story unfolds, there's a sexual component to that as they move on. And she asks him pretty directly about, how you would treat a woman. And he actually lies. He spins a yarn about what he's done with girls, but then eventually, in a childlike way, he backtracks. And I thought that was significant in the sense that he, as kids do, they tell stories to look good, that they've measured up to the cultural standards, to the societal standards, or what Charles Taylor would call the social imaginary of what people are supposed to live into. And so I thought that was pretty telling as well. So one more thing, and I can't really unpack this here because I'm still trying to figure this out, but I noticed it the second time around, in that third episode, when their interview's coming to an end, I think it's before he leaves the room. And by force, it starts to rain, and you hear the rain on the roof. And I'm still trying to figure out, what did that mean? What was the meaning in that rain? Because rain always means something, like cleansing, or perhaps that something even darker is going to happen. So yeah. So let me go to the fourth and final episode, and let's do this one quickly because I want to be careful with time and make sure we take a break and get to some application. But this is Eddie's birthday. It's 13 months later. As all of the episodes do, when the theme music's playing, it starts with a series of pictures. These are family pictures, happy times when this family, the Miller family, was younger. Eddie's in the shed, which is significant because the only time that Jamie says in his interview with the psychologist that he saw his dad mad was when he ripped a shed apart. Well, he's in the shed. The shed's constructed, maybe rebuilt, and there is Jamie's bike hanging there. That was, I see it, and I'm just waiting for Eddie to look at it before he closes the door, and he does. They struggle. Do we need to move? The shame that's there. They have a hard time going into his bedroom. They're trying to have a normal day, but the reality of Jamie's situation clouds it. And yeah, so that unfolds, and some kids who are from the school, they discover early in the morning that overnight they have painted the word nonce, N-O-N, I think it was N-O-N-S-E. It can be spelled N-O-N-C-E, N-O-N-S-E. It's basically a slang word in the UK for a sex offender. And are they accusing Eddie of abusing Jamie? That's been a question some have had, but it does not seem that that's the case at all. And so Eddie's got to navigate his birthday now dealing with that. And I won't tip my hand or tip our hand on what actually happens if you haven't watched it. But let's talk about that episode, because that one is just killer. I'm guessing you all sat like Chris and I sat on our respective couches as the credits played, just weeping. When that ended, it was hard to move away from the room and the television with that. Takeaways from that. What was poignant to all of you in that last episode, episode 4?
I guess obviously that last scene, we'll just leave it at that. That's enough to just rip your heart out. But apart from that, one of the parts that really stuck out to me, they're all in Eddie and Mandy's room, and Lisa, the sister, comes in, and they're talking about, do they move? Do they not move? And Lisa is actually the one who's like, no, we can't move. And, she says it'll get better, but then it's just going to get worse again. And she ends it by saying something to the effect of Jamie's ours. And just that unconditional love that sister had for her brother just wrecked me. Here's a girl who's also a teenager, who's also dealing with all of this, the normal adolescent things we've been talking about. But now on top of that, she's dealing with the fact that her brother has been accused of murder, which no doubt would have a negative effect on her life. So for her to say Jamie's ours, and just, sticking by him despite what he's done. I don't know, that just was really profound to me. Just the love that she had, and the compassion, and just, you don't see that a lot with humans. You don't see that a lot in teenagers, especially teenage siblings. So that was just that was really powerful.
I agree that last scene, I don't want to kind of ruin it for anybody, but that was a really culminating last scene, and kind of one of the takeaways I was pulling away from it. I actually can refer to an earlier comment. It was kind of a side comment, but I think they intentionally put it in there. It kind of is the underlying potential issue of blame, like who's to blame. And that when he's at the store, right, we're trying to get the paint, and the guy recognizes him, and he's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And he says, I blame the parents if you ask me, talking about the kids that actually painted his van. inappropriately. And so you could see he's giving his 2 cents of, oh, I blame the parents. They're the ones that, didn't raise the kid right, which you kind of get that underlying sense all the way through this show. Anyways, you have a comparison of 2 different dads and 2 different kids, both being bullied different ways a little bit, but both being bullied, one physically, very physically, as you saw in the class, even while the dad's standing there was happening. And then the other, obviously, some online bullying, but you also see the dad's response to how they're trying to care for them and be there for their kid. You get at least to see the positive one for the detective, where he has a free lunch and he's like, I gotta go take care of something, and he goes and spends it with his kid. He's like, I just want to spend it with you. You can see that like it started to have a positive turn just there, and that was the last we heard of him. But helps that comparison between the two, and then that last scene really culminates, and you can kind of see that. I don't want to take it away from you guys if you haven't watched it all yet, but a very powerful last scene that I think continues to show that weight and almost shame of the responsibility of parents, which I think all of us feel, no matter the age, is the responsibility we have of raising them, and if it's how much is our fault, if it's our fault, for the decisions that they make, and we can talk more about that in application, but very powerful scene and some good lines in there.
Yeah, just going off of that, I agree with all that. I think for me personally, reflecting on being a dad to 3 sons, and like all of the moments that I haven't been as intentional as I should be, with my kids, or if I let work get in the way, or I'm not fully present because my mind is elsewhere, or, that doesn't mean I'm a bad dad. It doesn't mean that I'm failing. It means I'm a human. But that moment, the very last scene on the bed, going back to sort of like when I'm just going to say it, spoilers.
Yeah.
When he's tucking in the teddy bear, I think it's transporting him back to when he's 2 years old, right? And laying in his crib, and a decade or so that it's elapsed since then, of all of like the potentially missed opportunities to enter his world, to be with him, to connect with him. And you have a little bit of that with Adam and Detective Bascom, where they're just missing each other. But then Detective Bascom says, "Hey, let's go get food. Let's go talk. Like I wanna be intentional about this." So I just think it's this clarion call for parents, to themselves step away from this digital distraction, and things that pull our attention away from what's in front of us, what the children that God has placed in our lives, our families, and to enter their world, like remove our own desires from the equation in a sense, and enter their world and get to know them, and invest, so that we can know what the things that they're really struggling with are. And, Walt, I said this during the break, but, I was thinking about just the CPYU and their mission, and it's, the Center for Parent Youth Understanding, and how we want to encourage parents and kids and mentors of kids to really to take up that call. And so anyways, that really, the kind of regret that was experienced in that episode, or the woulda, coulda, shoulda, like, was visceral for me as a parent, and it forces you to reckon, like, how am I doing this? Are there ways I can be doing it better? And so that, I don't think I've cried that hard in a long time, and that was powerful.
If you watch that last scene, and like you guys are saying, if you watch that last scene and you are not looking inwardly, you might have to have an hour with a psychologist. I seriously, I mean, yeah. Chris, did you want to add anything before we finish this up? Take a break here and then come back.
Yeah, the one thing that came to mind, with the scene about Bascom and his son Adam, when he asks him to go get food, there's something I think applicable there, in the sense that, like, when he first says, "Hey," his son, he calls his son over to his car, and he thinks he's just offering a ride home, and you can tell, like, being in the car with his dad one-on-one, that's such a foreign and uncomfortable thing for him. He's like, no, basically like, no, I don't want to ride. I'll just take the bus, because that's such an uncomfortable thing. And yet when the dad says, "Hey, how about we just go get food?" He says something like, "I can be hungry." And so hey,
This whole countenance changed.
yeah, food. I'll say, like that's something. Food is one of those things for me. I know, and I think it's true of others too. Like it somehow can break down barriers, right? So yeah, there's probably an application there to like, hey, if maybe conversations aren't comfortable when they're forced in a certain set, but hey, let's just forget about the conversation. Let's just go have food.
Yeah.
And then hopefully conversation takes place from there. But
yeah. You know what? We are making so many references to what we watched. You know, we're naming names, we're offering up dialogue, you know, interactions, encounters, things like that. And I'm guessing if you haven't watched yet, your head might be spinning right now. This is why you need to watch. But for those who have watched, the fact that we're pulling all of these things out, and there's so much more. I mean, in my notes here, there were so many more things just as an indicator of just how powerful this particular show is. And I go back to what I said at the beginning, that it's not gratuitous at all, and I think it captures so well the reality, so many of the realities of, you know, what I said earlier is this, you know, unseen, unknown adolescent underworld that we have got to be aware of. I think about, you know, one of the things we say here, thanks for bringing that up, Mike, about what we do here at CPYU, but John Stott, dual listening, knowing both the word and the world. We have to know the world in order to bring the light of God's word to bear on it. And the men of Issachar, right, who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. How do we know what to do? How do we know how to respond if we don't know the reality? And so I'm going to end this segment. We're going to come back, very short last segment. I'll give you instructions when we come back on what I want you to have us all do here to finish up our conversation. We're going to end this segment with this quote from the 4th episode because I don't want to be this guy. And it's when Eddie and Mandy, the parents, are sitting there. I wrote this down. I can't remember which one of them said it. But as a parent, they said, I do sometimes think we should have stopped it, seen it, and stopped it. I do sometimes think, and this is all the time in his room, just up late at night, lights on till 1 a.m. I do sometimes think we should have stopped it, seen it, and stopped it. You know, man, that is powerful. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Hey there, Youth Culture Matters listeners. We've been told that one of our best-kept secrets here at CPYU is our 1-minute daily podcast, Youth Culture Today. Each and every weekday, we release a new episode that's timely, practical, and hope-filled, all for an audience of parents, youth workers, and anyone else who cares about kids. Here's a sample from one of our recent Youth Culture Today episodes.
Youth Culture Today with Walt Mueller of the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding.
Parents, today I want to encourage you to take an active interest in those things that interest your children and teens. This is an easy one if you and your teens share the same interests. But what happens if you're a left-brained parent raising a right-brained child? We once heard a parent complain that his son didn't share his love for canoeing. Consequently, he didn't think there'd ever be anything he could do with his son. Sadly, it never crossed the frustrated father's mind that he could enter into his son's world in life by pursuing one of his son's interests. Maybe we should all think about putting some of our own interests aside for a few years so that we have more time to pursue the interests of our kids with our kids. Taking an interest in their interests not only allows us to spend much needed time with our kids, but opens up opportunities to communicate, builds our relationship, and lets us discover and celebrate their gifts and abilities. Take an interest in their interests.
For more on youth culture, visit us on the web at cpyu.org.
Youth workers, do your parents a favor and get them to subscribe to Youth Culture Today wherever they get their podcasts. Well, as we finish up, I want to think about some practical ways that adolescence can, spark us into practical responses to the issues that have been raised. And this could be in regards to parenting. It could be in regards to youth ministry. I certainly think if you've watched it already, watch it again, those of you who are listening, and think about, what is the issue here? How would the Lord have me respond? For those of you who have not yet watched, watch it with those, those glasses on to see, keeping your ear to the ground to say, yeah, that's something we need to address. I think overall, before I go to our folks here and ask what they've come up with on this, overall, I go back to Deuteronomy 6 and the responsibility of parents first and foremost, and then the faith community, the church, the youth group, to really surround our kids with the nurture of the Lord, to be talking about God's good order and design. What does it mean to live into God's will and God's way? Because certainly the culture is catechizing our kids out of that, and when our kids are left to themselves, by choice, by circumstance, with whatever's going on or not going on in the home, the place where they're going to land now is where they land as you see them land in the TV show Adolescence. That they're going to social media, they're going to the peer group, and they're getting a lot of misinformation that deforms them, that misshapes them. And so we need to do a better job. But let me, my question to everybody is, give us, 2 or 3 practical responses that came to mind for you. What do we need to address in our homes? What do we need to address in our youth ministries? Get us thinking about these. So let me go to Mike first.
Yeah, so the first thing that came to my mind was just a call to fathers with young boys. Obviously, this applies to girls and mothers too, but specifically with this show and for my own life, just the call towards discipleship, intentional discipleship, active engagement, entering their world, and then sort of fanning that out into the church. How can student ministries be intentional about maybe creating some dads groups to get together to kind of think through and pray through issues of discipleship of their boys or their kids in the home? Could you do a father-son weekend? Could you kind of programmatically instill some of these ideas and counteract and countervail some of the forces of our culture where our kids are getting discipled in some of these other spaces online? The second thing, that going back to that scene at the end where they enter into Jamie's room and they pan over to his gaming desk and they're wrestling with, should we have stopped it? Like what you said, Walt, that quote, should we have seen it and stopped it? I just think maybe a good principle that parents can take away is that the majority of media for a kid should be shared with their parents. So, if you have a den and you want to watch family movies together, that's great. You should do it together. They should not have TVs or screens or phones in their rooms. They just shouldn't. Maybe when they're older in high school, potentially depending on the kid and their maturity level and all of these things. But I really would just recommend that if you're going to have a screen in the home, it should be shared and you should watch things together so you can know what they're seeing. You can talk them through it. I just think that's so crucial. And then finally, just what we talked about earlier, if you are in a position as a parent, a grandparent, a mentor, a youth pastor, a youth worker, a volunteer, whatever it is, do never underestimate the power of speaking words of identity, true Christ-centered gospel identity to a kid, taking time to meet with them over a meal and show up in their life and say, here's what I see in you. Here's what God sees in you, more importantly. And you just never know what that's going to do for a kid. Because like we've seen in this show, they're so hungry for some adults to enter their life and acknowledge them and recognize them for who they are and to set them on that path and trajectory in life. So fathers and men discipling boys in their home and in the church, sharing media together is the sort of primary diet of your media intake as a family, and then speaking words of gospel identity to kids.
That's great. Who's up next?
So good, Mike, and I agree. I think there was a lot of good nuggets there that could change the trajectory for so many families. And a couple of things came to mind for me as I was going through this show, and I thought of Luke 6, where Jesus talks about out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so as I had, my own middle schoolers in mind, as I saw Jamie, or even as parents, as we have our own kids in mind, to remind ourselves that it starts with the heart, and the heart is actually the issue here. And we would say it's because we need Christ. We need a new heart ultimately, and to remind ourselves and our kids, whether we're parents or even as youth workers, that it starts there, that the gospel is the key to, one, revealing what our actual need and solution is for our heart. But then we focus on the why of these particular issues. And so whether we're a parent, as we shepherd a child's heart, it's more than just this final bad decision that we see in this show, and not just coming in the aftermath, but it's about the totality of life. So how do we focus on the heart and shepherd the heart throughout life? Well, it's about every decision, the good and the bad, the big and the small. We have to speak the gospel in more than just one time a week or affirming what's happening at the church life, but we actually have to incorporate it into our own life as well. We're not just looking for behavior modification, right? It's a term maybe you've heard before, but it's heart transformation. What ultimately happens through the power of the Holy Spirit, and we continue to point them towards Christ as parents, as youth workers. This storm isn't the best place, whether we're looking at this show, at this storm of a bad decision isn't the best place to build a foundation, right? With this foundation comes from us caring for our kids when they're younger, as Mike was saying, continue to build that bridge, relationship bridge, at any age, whether you're a parent that you've got older kids, and so maybe you're feeling some regret. There's no too late time to start. But maybe if your kids are younger, starting now to think, hey, what can I do now that's intentionally communicating that gospel, caring for their heart? A passage that came to mind that I feel like is so striking here is Matthew 5, right, where Jesus talks about and puts anger on par with murder. And the whole point of him doing that was because he's revealing the heart of anger there. And maybe a practical takeaway is to actually look at anger in the life of your kids or the life of your students, whether it's as youth workers, to talk about what the Bible says about our anger, how to actually practically deal with our anger, what should we do in it, what's the godly way to deal with it compared to what maybe the culture says and is okay in the ways to take it out on other people or things. What are we actually to do as Christians with our anger, and how should that look? As parents, also in the Sermon on the Mount there at the end of Matthew 7, he talks about dealing with the log that's in your own eye. And I think as parents and as youth workers, it's easy to look at others and think, oh, that they have this issue or this is wrong with them. Let me tell you how to do it right. But first, we need to address our own pride and our own, whether it's anger, our own issues, as we then care for others, right? It's to remove our own first so that we can help others, yes. But we first need to deal with our own. So whether that's a parent or as a youth worker, this goes for us too, to deal with that in that situation. So a lot of good practical takeaways. Right, let's end on a high note going to Katie.
Can I before we go to Katie, I want to and Josiah, I saw what you were doing there. You don't want me to respond to you.
Almost got it.
Yeah, I know. I'm on to you, buddy. No, here's the thing. I love what you said. Everything you said was great. What you said in the beginning about just the heart, going for the heart as opposed to behavior modification. I mean, this thing from start to finish, all 4 episodes start to finish. I mean, the groanings and the cries that we read about in Romans 8 are clear. They're high volume. We see it the whole way. And ultimately, we know that what the cries are for is redemption, right? And that heart change. And so I really appreciated you saying that. Yeah, that was good. That was good. I think about Ted Tripp's book, what's the title of that?
Shepherding a Child's Heart.
Yeah, Shepherding a Child's Heart. I drew a blank there for just a second, which goes back to what you were saying before. Somebody was talking about being a shepherd and, the way that shepherds work. And so Shepherding a Child's Heart by Ted Tripp is really good on that. Yeah, good. All right, Katie, go ahead. I know Kyle will send it over to you. Not Kyle, Josiah. What a mess up, man. I'm calling him Kyle, his boss. Kyle's going to love that.
Short friend.
Yeah, Josiah, yeah.
That's okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Katie.
Of course, several of the ones I had written down were already said. Obviously the importance of discipling parents when it comes to issues of culture and technology. And I think also just going off of that, helping our parents really understand the minds of their child, not only understanding their identity and helping pour into that from a biblical point of view, but also just a developmental point of view.
Mm-hmm.
We can get very frustrated with our teenagers when they make bad decisions. But just understanding their development and where they're at emotionally, physically, hormonally, all those things I think can be super helpful. Being intentional in the moments with your kids. I think, Josiah and Mike were both talking about, just being incarnational and being present with your kids to build those relationships with them. But I think to kind of wrap it all up, one of the big things that I'm really having to remind myself as a parent but also as a youth worker, is that ultimately our kids don't belong to us. We have been given these kids to guide and to shepherd and to steward to the best of our ability, but ultimately remembering that um, while we have a job to do, they don't belong to us. They belong to the Lord, and doing the best we can um, to guide them and to protect them and to shape them, but also being careful not to take the blame when they make choices um, that we can't be responsible for. I think the guilt that parents can feel, and you see it in the show. We've talked about it right at the very end. Could they have stopped it? Should they have stopped it? Even if they did stop it, would it have changed anything? Obviously, we don't know the answer to that question. But just remembering God's sovereignty in the lives of our children, um, regardless of what happens, I think is so important for us as parents, ourselves, but also to remind the parents of the students in our ministry, um, that our job is to shepherd and to steward as best we can, but then to hand it over to the Lord.
Yeah, you're talking about being tethered to good theology, and good theology comes as we read the scriptures and understand the heart of God, the mind of God, and as I said earlier, God's will and way for us, and certainly that translates into parenting. Chris, what do you have?
Yeah, some of mine have been spoken as well, but two that come to mind that I don't think we've touched on would be, one, the reminder not to get caught up in work or vocation, over family. We see that played out a little bit. That's kind of why some of the distant relationships between fathers and sons have taken place. It's because, fathers get wrapped up in work. And that's not, in this case, it was, fathers, but that's a reminder for anyone. And I think that's even, so that's a good reminder for all parents. But then I think too, for youth workers listening, for those of us in ministry, that's we can easily, I'm doing ministry, so it's okay that I'm spending late nights or, have one more event I have to go to. And, sometimes family gets neglected in that. So just a reminder to focus on your family and not let, not let work in the way of that. And then the second one I'll bring up is a reminder that this gives us some insight into maybe how we need to consider as churches how to minister to families who have gone through tragedy, experienced some kind of tragedy. A reminder that that it's really that's a long-term ministry thing, right? It's easy for, after somebody's experienced tragedy, maybe for the first 2 weeks to put together a meal train for them or to, be praying for them in that moment. But we see, 13 months later after this has all gone down, they're trying to go through what seems like Jamie's family's trying to go through what seems like a normal day. And there's glimpses of like happiness and joy and whatnot in that day, but it doesn't take much for them to get pulled back into the reality and the weight of what has taken place. And so that's a reminder for us that, like, for families who have experienced tragedy, these things don't go away after a couple weeks. Yeah. They're living with the realities of that long term, and we have to really come alongside them as churches, not just in the short term, but really in the long term.
Yeah, I like that. Boy, the ripples of trauma. And as you brought that up, Chris, I was thinking, they didn't have anybody who stepped in. Yeah. Oh, this is so good. So I'll just add a couple here. I think that Josiah, you talked about heading back into Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. As we get into that, I just think walking our kids through the Sermon on the Mount is very helpful for some of the issues that were brought up here, like bullying, how we treat others, what does it look like to love others as Jesus has loved us. I think the issue of anxiety is huge. And identity as well. Those were two big issues that I think we need to recognize, unpack, understand, educate parents on, and develop resources and responses that are biblical in nature. And then certainly borders and boundaries on social media. We've got some resources that we'll put in the show notes for this. I'm thinking about how to take a purposeful pause, and how to set time limits. And so Chris will put those in the show notes. If you go to the player for this particular show at cpyu.org, those resources are there. And any sort of parent education, Parents, we really want to serve you, and I'm just going to say this because I'm sitting here looking at our fellows here on Zoom, and even those who are not with us today. They're working hard, not only in their own ministries, but to share the wealth of that with other parents and other churches. And so if you go to our website, a lot of the parent prompts are there. And, get a parent group going in your church where you can support and encourage each other. So those were just some ideas that I had as well. I'll tell you one line I'm going to revisit here. When he's taken away and he says, I want dad here. I want dad here. Mom, dad, parents, families, we've been made for that. So I'm going to end with this. And folks, I appreciate you, Katie, Mike, Josiah, not Kyle, Chris, for being a part of this. I'm going to read I'm going to close out with this, Psalm 71, 17, and 18, which many of you are familiar with. You've heard me talk about this before. But the psalmist writes, O God, from my youth you have taught me, and I still proclaim your wondrous deeds. So even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your might to another generation, your power to all those to come. And we saw that generation in adolescence. So I encourage you to use it as a prompt. Pray through it. Think about the kids you know and love. Think about your church. Think about your community. And let's do everything we can to be prophetic in proclaiming God's word, and preventive and even redemptive as well when bad things happen in our families and in our churches. And so, it's just important for us to respond to this in the right way. So if we spoiled it for you, we're sorry. Not really. Go ahead and watch it. Those of you who watched it, I encourage you to watch it again and let it educate you. It's good. It's balanced. I think it's fair as well. Folks, thank you for joining us here. To our fellows, I love seeing you on the camera. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next episode of Youth Culture Matters.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.